Hi everyone, welcome to another Reasons and Resources. As you can see, in this one we're talking about COBOL. And again, I like to be transparent on these. Full disclosure, my exposure, I nearly said explosion, my exposure to COBOL is pretty limited. The first time I came across it was way back in, the end of the 70s really, when I was just sort of doing my computer studies course at secondary school, that course would have run from about 78 through to 1980, I think. And of course back then the vast majority of code, or the situations in which programming languages were used, was predominantly on mainframes. In 1980, the school sort of bought some Commodore PETs because they were coming in at that point. So for about a year, I did get access to a Commodore PET, and we did all our basic programming on that. But prior to that, we were actually sending off basic code to be processed at a mainframe that the school authorities owned, like their accounting mainframe. And it would be sort of run, at a time when it wasn't being used for accounting. So, most of the stuff like that, the legacy, the programming languages that we had a look at, so we didn't physically write in COBOL or Fortran or Lisp or anything else like that was around then. It was purely looking at the code and understanding how it worked. We only ever programmed in BASIC and a little bit of Cecil, which was what you were taught at school in terms of learning a low-level language. So Cecil was pretty close, I believe, to assembly language. So that's sort of environment I originally came across it, and then wasn't until somewhere in, because I'm just looking at my copy of this book actually. I actually have a copy of this in front of me. And it runs well into, the index starts at over 1,000 pages, so it's a big book. And I bought a copy of this in, when is it? So around about 97. Mine's only the second edition. This one you can see on the screen is actually the third, which has a compiler in it. Second edition doesn't. And we'll talk about how you can run COBOL programs nowadays anyway in a moment as part of this. But I bought it for my programming language book library for comparative language studies, and I'm trying to remember for the life of me in 97 whether or not I even went through the book. I think it was just purely for reference at that point. I was sort of trying to buy a book from each of the main languages that I was sort of interested in. So yeah, I do have a second edition copy of this from 97. 97, this copy of this is released. I don't know if this has ever been upgraded since then. I think I may have had a copy of this at some point, but I think I got rid of it because I didn't need it, because the other one was so comprehensive. And I did slim down my programming library a little bit, where I'd sort of doubled up on a couple of programming languages, and I didn't really need the second book. So yeah. So moving on from that, let's talk about some reasons and resources for learning the language. Well, I suppose the main big reason, if you want to go down this, is a legacy reason. Now, for me, learning COBOL now, it is purely for nostalgia, for understanding, what was available in terms of programming languages around that time, because of my interest in comparative programming languages. So, the COBOLs, the Fortrans, the Algols, the Lisps of this world, those sort of things, they're all a nice package to look at for someone like me that's interested in computing languages from the historical perspective, and seeing how was stuff being laid out on the page, and what sort of machines were being used to process it, because at that time we're talking about mainframes. However, when I'm talking about when COBOL first was created, was developed, I'll show you in a moment. Nowadays, obviously, you can run COBOL on a PC, and we'll talk a little bit about how you would do that. So yeah, there's still systems today running, mainly financial institutions, government agencies, some large corporations, where they're using COBOL for a legacy system. And there's certain things, of which we'll see in a moment, that COBOL really excels at. And what you tend to find is that there's programs running today which have been around for decades, very reliable, very stable, and they've just never been bothered to be upgraded. So yeah, and any demand that's out there, because I imagine the pool of available COBOL programmers is fairly small, demand, relatively speaking, be quite high, because it's a skill that's no longer really taught. But from my understanding, you'd have to have a pretty good understanding of COBOL to get a job in that area. So there is high demand, but you're going to be working on large mission critical systems, so they're just not going to let anybody in there to play around with them. If we look at when it was created, so we're moving more into the resources now, and as we do this, I'll talk a little bit as well about more reasons why you might want to check it out, and we'll look at some of the stats on that yearly survey that I always like to talk about. So COBOL was designed in 1959 by Codicil, and COBOL is an acronym, if you didn't know and didn't read this up here: Common Business Orientated Language. Now there have been updates since there. It does do object-oriented programming. It's an object-oriented language since 2002. And as it says here, most of the COBOL you probably come across is purely for maintaining existing applications. Programs are slowly getting moved over to new platforms, but there's still a large amount of stuff there. And if you want to know the sort of history, rather than me sort of just recite the page here, you can sort of read through the development of COBOL. It's interesting to see this whole splitting up of a language actually into these divisions, if you've never seen that before. It's worth just taking a bit of a side quest down COBOL just to see how that looks on the page. The other interesting thing is, with a legacy language like this, at what point in its history certain programming paradigms, certain ways of programming have been introduced into the programming language that weren't there when it was originally developed. And so it's quite interesting to go through this and see, like I said, the introduction of object-oriented concepts. And also how much maybe the layout may have or may not have changed. And the other thing to remember with is, of course, COBOL, if you go and look at some of these legacy systems, it's going to be running on a pretty diverse set of operating systems. So that's a whole can of worms in and of itself. It's quite something to sit down in front of an old school terminal. Actually, I can remember, it's quite amusing for me. I came from one environment I worked in where we just started introducing IBM clones. So this would have been about the mid into the late 80s into the early 90s. And I went and worked at an accounts office for a while after that. And the accounts office, at the point that I went and worked there, And that was during my sort of transition from working in the field of mainly microbiology and biochemical techniques over into working in more of a sort of computer sciences system implementation role. And I went and worked at a sort of accounting office for a while. I temped there and then eventually worked there full time, and that sort of springboarded me into other things. But it was interesting in seeing they were still using like dumb terminals, like the old green screen, where you've got like the square keyboard that's I think built into the screen pretty much, but everything's running actually remotely on a mainframe. And while I was there, they did introduce a few PCs like IBM clones, and we were actually running emulators on them, which is pretty funny. And we were having initially to run DOS to run the emulator, and then at some point I worked out how to run the emulator in Windows, I think, and we did it as an experiment on one of the machines for a little while. So yeah, but that was a bit of a step back because I'd sort of come from just getting used to I think a Windows environment, the early version of Windows, whatever was in. I don't remember when 3.11 came in. Actually, it was the early 90s, wasn't it? Because you had Windows 95. So yeah, sometime just before 95, I'd started to move from DOS to Windows myself. But it's funny when you have to take a step back and go back to using DOS for a period of time. Yeah. So it looks like a bit more of a sort of modern representation of the code. I don't know if it's got any old school. Here we go, yeah. So here's the here's what, when I used to look at it, I always sort of remember seeing these, these like sections in here and the numbering as well. And I think, yeah, when you see sort of coding examples, you often find that they don't always show the numbers, but the code's actually sort of always indented and allows for this space of characters here. And was it sort of 8 characters in total? It's something like that, isn't it? 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah, 8. So you might find that when you look at COBOL code on the web, certainly if you try and get it like an LLM to spit it out, you'll find it sort of indenting it by 8 characters. And I must admit, it doesn't. Some of the LLMs out there don't do too bad a job at writing rudimentary COBOL code that will actually run. And fairly, I was quite surprised how when I was working through, we'll come on to a moment, my programming polyglot entry for this, I didn't have too much trouble getting really rudimentary algorithms to run. So I include just slightly easier links into the history and specification sections and the features and the syntax and all that lovely stuff if you're interested in it. Like, there's the old-fashioned punch cards. There's green screen. Wow, we didn't used to have to fill in punch cards for basic, but we did have to fill in coding sheets. I don't know if anybody is of an era where they remember having to fill in coding sheets with a pencil, fairly sort of heavy pencil, or like one of the, something like an HB pencil, or nothing too hard, so that the characters you were writing would look really clear. Yeah. But you can tell by the title, this is a language that was primarily designed for, business operations. "300 dialects by 2001. Yep, so you may find that. And again, it's interesting because I can remember learning basic for whatever it was at the time. So basic. And then having to sort of learn slightly. I think Commodore Basic wasn't too different from the Basic I learned, and just a few tweaks in here. But I did find quite a big or enough difference between, say, Commodore Basic and then trying to do Basic on an Apple, and then again after that switching to GW Basic. So GW Basic and Q Basic were fairly similar, so the stuff that ran on the PC. But I can remember there being slightly different dialects of Basic. Like I said, you had the one on the Commodore PET, the one for the Apple II. So I can imagine what it must be like with COBOL actually, and it's quite frustrating. When there's slight little differences here and there, sometimes to me are more frustrating than big differences. Okay, let's have a look at the usual report we do. So we're still running 2024 here because the 2025 one won't be out for a while, and again I'm recording these videos about a month ahead of schedule, so at some point we'll get to see the new one. I'll probably have to do both when I said there's some sort of commonality in this series. So if we look at COBOL on the list, this is the most popular technologies from the Stack Overflow survey. I imagine it's probably quite far down, yeah. So underneath Prolog, OCaml and COBOL, but above Crystal, Nim and Zephyr. I think Nim's pretty new, isn't it? It's Crystal. I thought that was pretty new as well. So, right. Oh yeah, admired and desired, this chart. So, COBOL desired 0.7%. Also, not a lot of love for it, 26.2%. So pretty low down. And then when we look at this top paying technologies, where does COBOL come in here? I'd expect it to be, yeah, somewhere here. So just below Fortran, and then above things like Haskell and Julia. So on this graph, actually it's somewhere in the middle. Oh, I never really looked at this change of salaries list before. That's interesting. That's pretty cool. Yeah, okay. It's quite a handy dandy graph. You can sort of see where things are going with some stuff here. Yeah, Nim's on the uptick. Oh, COBOL's actually gone down. Median yearly salary. Has anything gone up? Looks like most things have gone down, haven't they? 23 to 24. Yeah. Anything here? Erlang and Nim and Apex. Yeah. There you go. Nim, Erlang and Apex. There. This gives you some food for thought. I'll include some general resource links. The problem I found with COBOL, like some of the other languages I've looked at, there's like one port of call for everything, and it's really comprehensive. I found personally, and someone can correct me in the comments section if they get a different impression, but you do have to sort of go round and cherry pick the resources a little bit. We'll look at some specific things in a moment, but yeah, this is quite a good starting point. And also there is some main, so you've got the COBOL standard a lot of the stuff seems to be through the Wayback Machine or the open group as well. But I'll make sure there's links for these sections so you can sort of drill down and do a bit of investigating. However, this is probably a good starting point as any. Is just to to install this and roll your sleeves up and dig in. So yeah, there is a new COBOL. There's one for Windows, which is what I run. And yeah, so you can check it out that way. Kick the tires, and yeah, a few other things you can look at as well. Check them all out. So what I've done in terms of the videos are worth checking out. So there is a COBOL course, free code camp, COBOL course programming with VS Code. Okay, it's not really, it's about an hour, 17 minutes long. If you just want to check it out. Computer History Museum have posted a video from way back, a recording from 1960, was world's first COBOL compilers. Also got a link to this talk on the Papers We Love channel, which I really enjoy watching some of these. One about the relationship between COBOL and computer science. And then finally a very interesting historical. So this is Rear Admiral Grace Hopper, who was, very, very heavily involved in the development of COBOL, amongst other things. To do with computer languages and such like in the early days of computing. And this is from 1982. Okay, a lecture that she gave. That's pretty interesting to watch. There is some COBOL exercises on exorcism. Hello World. But if you look at their chart, there's some other things that it'll get you to try and do. So, determine whether something is a leap year in COBOL as a challenge. And then shameless plug. So my little project I'm working on slowly, where I'm sort of using LLMs to sort of leverage the learning of programming languages and the history of programming languages and their differences and similarities. And despite skipping over a few languages, whilst I try and acquaint myself better with them so I can actually quality control the code a bit, I have actually managed to put together one for COBOL. And you can see what I was talking about indentation. So now with this I've included some basically how you compile it, run it as well, which is quite handy. Obviously you need access to the COBOL compiler to do that. But, yep. And I've tested all of this. Yep. So, and yeah, with this, the outputs can be pretty strange. Yeah, so yeah. These are all, when I ran the code, this is all the examples of the output I got. So I was really meticulous and showed things, warts and all. Here, I made no attempt to format the outputs either, because I thought that was pretty interesting. It made me chuckle actually. On here, so yeah. I had a lot of fun actually doing this one, and it's quite cool to actually be able to run, like COBOL on a PC. Didn't have much trouble doing it in terms of, it's obviously, modern machines are way more powerful than, mainframes back in the day. So, and I decided to keep the indentation, although yeah, a couple of times I was tempted to remove it just because of the way this is designed to render on phones. I found this well, for me anyway, testing it out, it works pretty well on a phone and on a tablet, so that's why it's this design. And then when you actually run this properly, you know, when you run this, it looks pretty good on a device. That was the point, really, seeing as most people have devices. And when I finish this, I will be popping the reason resources on the bottom of this, in this area here. So as I do these, I'm adding them to the bottom. So there we have it. Hopefully you enjoyed that little trip down reasons and resources for learning COBOL. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future episode.